Not any special one. There was a little girl that I was seeing quite often over there that her father was in the Air Force, and actually they only got over there about 2 months before I left. I was seeing her, and she was at the airport when I left.
Before Elvis lit up the stage, something unusual was already happening behind closed doors. Far from the screaming fans and glittering lights, he was locked into strange, deeply personal rituals, ones that went far beyond standard pre-show routines. He wasn't just preparing, he was being rebuilt. Injections, strict medication schedules, and carefully timed habits weren't about superstition, they were about survival. What fans saw was the myth, the jumpsuit, the swagger, the voice. But behind that legend was a man struggling to keep it all together. After each show, the routine didn't stop. It shifted into recovery mode, filled with whispered treatments and exhaustion. By the 1970s, Elvis wasn't just performing music, he was maintaining a fragile machine powered by pressure and pain. This is the untold story of the King, not as a flawless icon, but as a man caught in an exhausting cycle to live up to a legend the world refused to let go. So what did it really take to become the King every single night? And more importantly, what did it cost him? Stick around. The answers might surprise you. Elvis Presley's day began when most people were ending theirs, around 3 or 4 in the afternoon in a hotel room sealed off from sunlight by blackout curtains. There were no signs of morning, no sunlight, no noise, just eerie stillness. Time didn't matter. The only clock Elvis followed was the countdown to showtime. His morning ritual began with a sacred cup of black coffee, strong, bitter, and essential. Nothing happened before that cup touched his lips. But caffeine was just the first step. What followed was a routine Elvis and his team quietly called breakfast. Not food, but a precise lineup of pills. Appetite suppressants, decongestants, blood pressure meds, mood stabilizers, all measured and administered like medical protocol. These weren't optional, they were necessary to activate him. It wasn't about feeling rested or refreshed, it was about getting Elvis stage ready, no matter the cost. His day didn't start with rest. It started with survival, one pill at a time. And yet, to Elvis, this was normal. This was his new version of waking up. A ritual so routine that anything outside of it felt wrong, even dangerous. Because his body had stopped following its natural rhythm long ago. It ran on a schedule created not by biology, but by necessity. Imagine living like that, waking up only when the world is already halfway through the day. Walking into a room with no light, sitting alone and swallowing a handful of pills before saying a single word to another human being. That kind of routine doesn't just change your schedule, it changes you. Elvis was the most recognizable man on earth, and yet for most of the day he lived in complete isolation. Few people were allowed into his space during those early hours. It wasn't just about privacy, it was about protection. That routine, as bizarre as it might seem from the outside, was the only thing keeping him together. Breaking it wasn't an option. And as strange as it sounds, there was comfort in the control. Each step was known, predictable, safe. Even if it involved chemicals and rituals, it gave Elvis the illusion that he had a grip on things, that he was still the master of his world, even as that world shrunk around him. But here's where the emotional weight creeps in. Because while that reverse clock lifestyle helped Elvis get through the day, it also kept him apart from everyone else. Friends would talk about how hard it was to reach him, how strange it felt to only see him after dark. While they were enjoying the daylight, he was in a cocoon, silent, shut away, preparing to become someone the world expected him to be. There's something quietly heartbreaking about that, about needing so much ritual just to feel okay. About not waking up to the people you love or the places you enjoy, but to coffee, curtains, and a tray of pills. And yet, that was his reality. While the world was winding down, Elvis was gearing up for war. A war with his body, his mind, and the crushing expectations that came with being the king. Every night was a new battle. Every show was another mountain to climb. And every day it all had to start again. Like clockwork, like a machine. But here's the thing about machines. Eventually they wear down. What began as a method to help him perform became a system he couldn't escape. The caffeine, the pills, the precision, all of it built to keep him going, not thriving. It was survival dressed up as preparation. And no matter how normal it might have seemed to the people closest to him, the truth is, this wasn't normal at all. This was the beginning of a cycle that would push Elvis further into dependency, further into isolation, and further away from the man he used to be. Because when your morning starts at sunset and your breakfast comes from a pill bottle, you're not living a life. You're performing one. And Elvis? He had to perform it every single day. As showtime crept closer, Elvis Presley didn't just get dressed, he transformed. And that transformation, it was anything but glamorous. It wasn't about slipping on a suit and stepping into a spotlight. It was a process, rigid, rehearsed, and loaded with pressure. Every step had a purpose. Every item, every smell, every injection played a role in turning a tired, aching man into the myth the world expected. The transformation began with what the crew called the sacred shot. A B12 injection, always delivered by Dr. Nick, Elvis's ever-present physician and trusted confidant. This wasn't just a vitamin boost, it was a ritual, as routine and essential as checking the mic or tuning a guitar. Without it, there was no performance, no shot, no show. That quick jab to the arm was a signal, one that told Elvis, it's time to turn it on. He didn't question it. He didn't skip it. The moment the needle went in, the countdown began. Adrenaline mixed with expectation. The king was waking up not biologically, but chemically. Again. But the B12 wasn't the only thing Elvis demanded before stepping out under the lights. There were antihistamines too. Every single night, rain or shine, whether he was in Vegas or Memphis. Because Elvis had a fear, a specific creeping fear that if his nose clogged or his throat tightened, he'd fail. Not just stumble, fail. Missing a note wasn't just embarrassing, it was terrifying. It meant disappointing thousands. It meant cracking the illusion. And for Elvis, illusion was everything. That fear of sounding off, of not hitting the perfect note, pushed him into a nightly routine of antihistamines, whether he needed them or not. Then came the cosmetic rituals, the little things that to anyone else might have seemed vain. But to Elvis, they were part of the myth. His eyelashes? Dyed jet black. Not naturally dark, but touched up regularly to keep that signature gaze burning under stage lights. His hair? A cocktail of dye and pomade slicked into that perfect gravity-defying pomp that had become a trademark. And with those dyes came the smell. Faint, but always there. A mixture of chemicals and sweat. It lingered in the dressing room, combined with the sharp sting of alcohol wipes, the sterile scent of medicine, the warmth of steaming fabric from last-minute costume prep. That air was thick, not with nerves, but with transformation. You could almost feel it. His jumpsuits were more than fashion. They were armor, steamed, starched, laid out just so. Each one a sparkling symbol of who he was supposed to be. Rhinestones catching the light, custom embroidery shimmering with every move. But beneath that shine was a man who hadn't eaten properly, who'd slept in fragments, who was being pieced together hour by hour. And at the center of it all, Dr. George Nicopolis, or as Elvis called him, Dr. Nick. He wasn't just a doctor, he was part alchemist, part therapist, part fixer, a quiet force behind the curtain, mixing vitamins, adjusting meds, delivering injections, listening without judgment. Dr. Nick knew every twitch in Elvis's face, every crack in his voice. He could tell if something was off before Elvis even said a word. And if it was, he'd adjust, tweak a dose, change the timing, offer something new. Not because he wanted to control Elvis, but because Elvis needed someone to keep the system running. And at that point, the system was Elvis. There were moments, even in the middle of all this, when Elvis would laugh, crack a joke, do a silly dance while waiting for his collar to be ironed. But those moments got rarer. The more complex the rituals became, the less human the process felt. It was no longer just about preparing for a performance. It was about survival, keeping the engine running long enough to get through another hour on stage. And over time, what started as support started to feel like weight. The rituals weren't helping anymore. They were controlling. There was no flexibility, no room to change course. If one step went wrong, if the B12 shot wasn't ready, if the antihistamine was late, if the jumpsuit didn't fit just right, it threw off everything. That tension built silently, night after night. Even if the audience never saw it, the people backstage could feel it. The pressure wasn't just to perform, it was to uphold the myth. And the further Elvis went into these routines, the harder it was to separate the man from the mask. He had to look like Elvis, sound like Elvis, be Elvis, even when he felt like anything but. And yet, he kept doing it, night after night, following the same steps, trusting the same people, leaning on the same routines, because the scariest thought of all was what might happen if he stopped. The transformation was no longer optional. It wasn't showbiz. It wasn't superstition. It was the scaffolding holding up a man who felt like he might fall apart without it. And that, more than anything, was the truth behind the myth. Elvis Presley didn't become a legend by accident. But by the 1970s, staying that legend came with a price. A ritual-laden process of injections, pills, fear, vanity, and the fading hope that somewhere beneath it all, the real Elvis was still there. The final note would ring out, the spotlight would fade, and the roar of the crowd would crash like a tidal wave. For a few moments, it was pure electricity. Cheers, screaming fans, thunderous applause. Elvis would bow, flash that iconic smile, maybe toss a scarf into the crowd, and then disappear behind the curtain. And just like that, it was over. The transformation that had taken hours to build unraveled in seconds. As the noise of the outside world faded, Elvis slipped into silence. Not rest, not relief, something closer to shutdown. Because for him, there was no relaxing after a show, no party, no celebration. What came next was a crash, a hard, lonely descent from the high of performance. Behind the stage, he was helped out of his jumpsuit, wiped down, maybe handed a drink, but there was no lingering, no victory lap. Elvis didn't bask in the glory. He retreated, fast, usually straight to his hotel suite or his room in the mansion, where blackout curtains were already drawn and staff kept their distance unless summoned. And once he was alone, the real cool-down began. Elvis couldn't just go to bed. His body was still wired, his nerves still buzzing. That much adrenaline doesn't just leave quietly. So, like clockwork, a different set of medications would appear, usually sedatives. Pills to help him sleep. Pills to take the edge off. Sometimes mild, sometimes stronger, depending on how wound up he was. These weren't taken casually. They were needed. Without them, sleep didn't come. Alongside the meds came his decompression habits. Strange, sometimes repetitive, often telling. He would turn on the TV, always loud, and flip through channels endlessly. Not to watch something specific, but to not be alone with the silence. The noise helped him come down from the high. He needed it. Silence felt too much like falling. Other nights it was food, binge eating mostly. Plates of fried peanut butter and banana sandwiches, burgers, chips, sweets, whatever comfort food he craved in the moment. There was something about eating late at night that made him feel grounded again, like a regular guy instead of a myth. Even if it was unhealthy, even if he regretted it later, in those hours, food felt like a small kind of peace. Sometimes he'd want to talk, long, winding conversations that could go deep into the night. Philosophical, nostalgic, or just plain weird. He'd call friends or staff into his suite and hold court for hours. And other times, he'd say almost nothing. Just sit in the dark, TV humming in the background, lost in thought. What he was really doing, without realizing it, was trying to fill the void. Because after the applause, there was always a void. You'd think a man who'd just been adored by thousands would feel satisfied. But that's not how it worked. The high of performance was intense, but temporary. The crash afterward? That was real, and heavy, and lonely. For Elvis, it was one of the cruelest parts of fame. On stage, he was worshipped. Off stage, he was isolated. It was like living in two worlds that never quite connected, and that constant swing from hero to ghost took a toll. Physically, his body was running on fumes. The cycle of stimulants before the show and sedatives after meant his system was always being pushed and pulled. There was no real rest, just moments of artificial calm. Spiritually, it was worse. Elvis had grown up with music as his escape, his salvation. But now, it was work. It was pressure. And when the curtain fell, he wasn't running toward anything. He was just trying to escape what was left behind. That's why Dr. Nick never clocked out after a performance. His job didn't end with the last encore. Each night, he'd do one final check-in with Elvis before calling it a day. He'd take his vitals, heart rate, blood pressure, ask how he was feeling. Sometimes he'd administer another injection, maybe something light to help Elvis sleep. Other times, just a quiet conversation, a reminder that someone was still watching, still caring. Dr. Nick had seen it all by then. The nights when Elvis was chatty and lighthearted, the nights when he was quiet and heavy, the nights when his hands trembled from exhaustion, but he still managed a joke. It became their routine, this small, strange ritual that ended every night. And once it was done, the lights would go out. Another show behind him. Another day survived. And tomorrow, the whole thing would begin again. The saddest part in all of this wasn't the drugs or the diet or the strange routines. It was the emptiness, the hollow space Elvis returned to every night, the emotional weight of carrying a legend on your shoulders while feeling completely alone in your own skin. He could sell out stadiums, he could make people scream with a single smile. But when the door closed behind him, it was just Elvis, tired, wired, and desperately searching for a little peace before the cycle repeated itself. In the end, the post-show routine wasn't about recovery. It was about escape. And night after night, Elvis kept escaping, into food, into television, into silence, into sleep, trying in his own way to find a few hours where he didn't have to be the king, just a man in a quiet room waiting for morning to come again, even if his morning started long after the sun had gone down. Looking back, it's easy to dismiss Elvis Presley's routines as eccentric or over the top. The pills, the injections, the dyed lashes, the blackout curtains, it all sounds like the quirks of a celebrity living in excess. But for Elvis, these weren't luxuries. They were armor. Every ritual, every dose, every quiet moment before and after a show was part of a carefully built defense, meant to keep the myth alive and the man from falling apart. They worked. For a while. Elvis Presley's carefully crafted rituals allowed him to perform night after night, dazzling fans even as he was physically and emotionally exhausted. These routines became his armor, but also his prison. Over time, the difference between preparing for a show and surviving it disappeared. The pressure to be perfect left no room for weakness or rest. Elvis wasn't just performing music, he was performing himself constantly. Fans saw the legend but not the pain behind the scenes, the silence, the loneliness, the growing dependence on rituals just to function. While the world remembers the icon, few recognize the personal cost he paid to maintain that image. His routines became his reality, masking a man struggling under the weight of fame and expectation. In the end, to stay the king, Elvis had to sacrifice his humanity, one ritual at a time. Behind every spotlight, there's a shadow, and Elvis's was darker than most ever knew. If this look behind the curtain gave you a new perspective on Elvis, let us know in the comments. What do you think the real cost of fame was for him? And how many other legends might be hiding similar truths? Hit that like button if this story moved you, subscribe for more deep dives into the lives behind the legends, and tap the notification bell so you never miss a moment. There's always more beneath the surface, and we're just getting started.